I always think, when I think about philanthropy and the kind of conversation I want to have today, about an example of a project the Gates Foundation funded. And it was a project around homelessness, particularly for single mothers in the Pacific Northwest. It was a sizable project, about a $20 million project. The Gates Foundation did a terrific job of finding highly effective grantees, of creating thousands of new housing units. They actually got government funding to come alongside them and leverage their impact. And after about 5 years, they hired an evaluator who evaluated it and found it had met all of their expectations. The nonprofits had done exactly what they'd hoped they would do. The goals of the project had been fulfilled. But at the same time, the number of homeless single mothers in the Pacific Northwest had dramatically increased over those 5 years. And I always think of that example because it emphasizes to me that there is a difference between giving away money well and solving social problems. You know, we tend to think they're the same thing, and that we're in the business of giving away money because we're funders. But I think we can be in a much, much more powerful business, which is the business of really having impact on complex social problems. And to do that, you need to play a role that is more than just check writing. And you also need to think about social change differently. Because I think philanthropy in many ways has taken a wrong turn. I actually love the title of this conference, this session, about Beyond the Silver Bullet. Because I think a lot of philanthropy is about the idea that there's a silver bullet out there, and we can fund it. And I think it leads to a lot of kind of magical thinking. And I'm sure that if each of us thinks back on the many, many, many projects we've funded, none of them have really felt like the silver bullet we hoped they might have been. But I think there's a different way to think about the role of funders and a different way to think about social problems. And the reason I think such a different approach is called for is that there are really three different types of problems. There are simple problems, like baking a cake, and all you need is a recipe. And if you follow the recipe, you're going to get a cake. Yours is probably going to be better than mine, but still, it'll be a cake. They're complicated problems, like putting a man on the moon. Much more complicated than baking a cake, but there's still a formula. And if you get the physics right and you build the right things and run the math out and you follow it, it's very complicated, but you will get the man on the moon. But then there's a third category, which is really complex problems. And it's like raising a child. You know, there is not a single answer. There isn't a formula. You can't control the child. And many of the social problems we try and tackle are complex problems. Problems that there isn't a formula for. We actually don't know the solution. And even if we knew the solution, writing a check wouldn't be enough to make it happen. And for those kinds of problems, it takes multiple players working together to really make a difference. And that's something our sector doesn't do very well. Instead, I think our sector tends to think about what I've started to call isolated impact. You know, as a funder, we look at lots of grantees working on an issue, and then we try and pick, you know, the organization that seems to have the best angle, the best solution. This is the most effective organization in homelessness or job creation, poverty, whatever the issue might be. And we fund them, and then we want to try and scale them up or get them replicated so that they'll grow and address the problem on a larger scale. But no single organization can solve a complex social problem on large scale. And so this whole idea of finding an individual organization and betting on them I think doesn't work for complex problems. Funders are in a great position to shine light on an issue, to call attention to an issue, to create that sense of productive distress. They're in a great position to make sure that others come to the table, so that not only the loudest and most powerful voices are heard in trying to solve the problem, but less empowered voices are also heard equally loudly. And just like collective impact, it's this idea of the funder not funding the solution, but causing a process to occur that leads people to find solutions for themselves, that leads to greater alignment in this tremendously fragmented system we have. And actually, and I think this may be a segue to Eric, that leads to learning. Because the alternative to the silver bullet isn't that we do nothing. It's that we have silver buckshot, if you will. Lots of little improvements that together make the system of addressing a social issue more effective. And I think we need to shift our model away from funding the solution, saying we can help the nonprofit, for-profit, governmental sectors work more effectively together around an issue over time. It's a lot less sexy role for a funder, but it's real, and it can make real progress. And the key to that progress is learning. It's using evaluation not to test whether some model worked or didn't work, but as a tool for organizational learning over time. And not just for your own organization, but for all of the players involved. So that whether it's government, whether it's the nonprofits, whether it's other funders, everybody is getting the same data. And because it is analyzed well, because it is common measures across different organizations, it's data that has real meaning and can lead to improvement over time. The issue of getting credit is a big issue. I talked to the senior executive at one very large US foundation who said, you know, this collective impact idea is fine, but our foundation could never do it because our board wants to know what we accomplished. And you're asking me to participate in an open-ended process that may not work, and even if it works, we can't take credit for it. And I think when we wrote the article about collective impact, we knew that for nonprofits, for grantees, the issue of getting credit would probably matter because they wanted to show what they had done to raise money. We didn't realize how important it was to funders. But it turns out it really is. And that is a problem. I think one of the mindset shifts we need to address, and that is necessary for collective impact and the vibrant communities model to really take hold, is to think about contribution rather than attribution. So we have been a participant in a process that has had results. And if you are following the kind of evaluation that Eric and I both believe is most helpful, which is an ongoing process of learning, it's not about it worked or it failed. It's not about I did it or someone else did it. But it is about learning over time what seems to be working and what seems not to be working. And being able to articulate that our foundation has played a role in enabling this process. But we absolutely can't attribute change. And I think we should not try, and it's an issue not for evaluation, but for board education. You know, I'll throw out an analogy while we're waiting for the next question. I think people often say, you know, the kind of philanthropy we're talking about seems so much harder and takes so much more time. And it made me think of a metaphor, which is the difference between a spectator sport and actually playing in the game. And I think a lot of philanthropy is a spectator sport. But what we're talking about is being a participant in social change, being a player in the game. And if you ask a football team, which player made you win, it's a meaningless question. Certainly there may be a star player who contributed hugely and other players, but you couldn't have done it without everybody. And it doesn't mean it wasn't a fulfilling role to play in the game, that you aren't the single person who made the team win. And I think we really do need to think about this model of participants in a team sport. And believe me, I was never a participant in a team sport, so I'm on thin ice here using this model. But I think it works as a model for a different way of thinking about the role of philanthropy.